Hello and welcome to your July 11th daily briefing. Today we're going to discuss some $600 additional unemployment news, the second stimulus check, updated hazard pay information. I haven't talked about that in a while, and I have some interesting information on that. And I answer a couple of your stimulus-related questions from the comments later on in this video. And before I get into it, please consider hitting the like button on this video for the YouTube algorithm. Helps spread this content out to a wider audience, and I would greatly appreciate it. And let's get into it. Starting off, more than 100 House Democrats are pushing President Trump to extend the $600 per week pandemic unemployment assistance program. There seems to be a huge disparity where the parties sit on this particular issue right now. Many Republican members, including President Trump, feel that the PUA program causes a disincentive to work, and if it is to continue, there needs to be some kind of change or reform to address the issues. Many of the proposals right now are lowering the dollar amount, doing some kind of sliding scale amount based on unemployment levels. There's all sorts of ideas being bounced around right now. And then on the Democratic side, many Democratic members feel that this program is essential to the recovery of the economy and has helped decrease the amount of damage the pandemic has caused to the economy. So this is a major issue because the goal and expectation for the next stimulus bill is to be as bipartisan as possible. So if this PUA issue is a red line item for either party, we might actually see further delays in the next package unless something is worked out in advance. And I personally really hope that we don't see another delay and a package that ends up being even further in the future after the August vacation for the Senate. I don't think that's going to happen, but it would sure be a bummer to see that happen. One positive here is the looming expiration date. PUA is set to expire on July 31st, so this gives us a tight deadline to make a decision beforehand. It's positive because I believe that this will lead to more swift negotiations when they know that this date is going to happen either way, and they pretty much need to make a decision before that date happens. Back to the House letter, they said that cutting off enhanced unemployment benefits while the economy is still in a crisis would ignore the millions of Americans who are still suffering. This in itself is pretty hard to argue while looking at the data. Unemployment rates at 11% and projected GDP to be down by double digits at the end of the year. It's a pretty scary outlook, and obviously some kind of support is needed for those who are in need. Is PUA the solution? I'm not really sure, but it is something. The letter goes on to say, our nation is currently reckoning with deep-rooted racial injustices. These injustices are the reason communities of color are disproportionately feeling the health and economic effects of the pandemic, and this must be addressed. So there wasn't a specific site as to what that is in reference to, but looking at the data, I think it's likely in reference to the second quarter unemployment statistics for 2020 that show unemployment levels varying based on race. The levels show that 12% of white Americans were unemployed, 14.3% of Asian Americans, 16.1% for Black and African Americans, and 16.7% for Hispanic Americans. A huge concern there is if there isn't some kind of additional lifeline, millions will lose their homes and face evictions, resulting in this downward spiral of less money to spend, obviously nowhere to live, no roof above their heads, less things being bought in the economy, which leads to less money going to businesses, which forces more businesses to close or lay off employees. So less people have jobs or incomes, and then they're spending even less. It's just this downward spiral that we do not want to see. It's just not a pretty scenario, and that's why help is needed in the first place. I just feel that there's got to be some solution to get those in need the support they need while still incentivizing people to seek out work opportunities if there is opportunities available to them. There's just got to be some solution out there. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but there's a solution. There's got to be. All right, let's move off of this topic. And why don't I address a few of your stimulus-related questions that I've seen in the comments. I haven't done this in a few weeks, so there's some good ones. All right. The first one I'm going to address, because I've seen similar questions many times, is what is going on with hazard pay. So for a while, we heard a lot about different forms of hazard pay proposals and ideas like the Patriot Pay proposal, which is pretty much hazard pay, which offered an additional $12 an hour, which equated to about $1,920 per month to essential workers. That essential worker term wasn't very well defined as to who would be included in that, and there were some income level changes that would vary exactly how much you receive, but you get the basic idea. However, more recently, there hasn't been much talk in the way of hazard pay on a federal level anyways. The only hazard pay proposals I've seen recently are in more small and segmented areas and are administered by smaller governments. Many of these you probably haven't even heard of. So I'm going to go over some examples just so you can get an idea of how hazard pay is kind of being administered in some areas across the country. In Michigan, there's a grant program that allotted $300 million in hazard pay for first responders and some other essential workers for working during the pandemic. How this works in Michigan is eligible employees can be given up to $1,000 on a first come, first served basis until funds are allocated. So it's kind of like another $1,000 stimulus check. There's a very tight amount of funding available for this, and I didn't see a whole lot of information on how hard it is to actually receive this money, or if it's going to certain people first, or how exactly the programs will be ran. There's not very many details, but the people who are eligible for this program are defined as having done work involving physical hardship during the pandemic. So it's kind of loosely defined, so it seems like a lot of different people in different careers are able to apply for this. Another example of hazard pay is Jefferson County. Their sheriff's deputies will receive hazard pay backdated more than 4 months. This county allotted just over $4 million for these officers to receive hazard pay. The amount allotted is an additional $50 per day worked during the pandemic. So that adds up pretty fast, especially when backdating 4 months. If an officer worked 5 days a week for the last 4 months, that actually equates to a $4,000 hazard pay bonus. So basically a $4,000 stimulus check, backdated, plus I can only assume that this will go on for a specified period until the pandemic is done, so an additional $50 a day. That adds up to a lot of money. Not bad to be working in Jefferson County right now. So, in summary, yes, there is hazard pay going on, but it's largely being administered at state and local government levels. So it's important to note that all the hazard pay programs I looked at were still actually funded federally through the CARES Act. This is because the funding for state and local governments through the CARES Act was set up in such a way that allowed these smaller governments to have a large amount of authority over where the funds were spent. That way, it wasn't this big government saying you need to spend this and this. They're basically saying, hey, you guys, your smaller governments, know where you need to spend this money, so we'll give you a little bit more leeway on how to spend it. So if you feel you deserve hazard pay in your line of work, or you have a strong argument for receiving hazard pay, I would strongly suggest you get some people together and contact your local representatives to attempt and get something done on a more small and local level. That seems like right now that's the only way you will possibly get hazard pay, is get a bunch of people together and talk to someone locally, because they receive funding through the CARES Act. There's money sitting there in most cases, and that's really the way you're gonna have to do it. All right, let's move on to the next questions. The next one is, there was a lot of questions having to do with the $40,000 a year limit for the next stimulus check. So I figured I'd address a few of these quickly. The first one is, if you make $41,000, does that knock you out, or would the payment scale down? So of course I can't answer this question with complete certainty because there's no official guidance on this yet, but I saw similar questions so much, so I'll take a whack at it. So if I were to make an educated guess, I would say that it would scale down after $40,000. It's hard to make the argument that someone who made $40,000 is dealing with financial hardship, but someone who made $41,000 isn't. So it'll probably scale down to something like $70,000 a year adjusted gross income before that stimulus check reaches $0. And then also on this same topic, because I'm remembering another question about it, if the stimulus check was set at $40,000, that would likely mean it's $80,000 for joint filers and somewhere around $70,000 AGI for head of households. All right, moving on to the next question. This one is the same topic. I'll get through it real quick. Someone asked, does the under $40,000 include people who are on Social Security? Again, I can't answer with total certainty. I can only make educated guesses, but I believe if we saw a $40,000 limit on the next stimulus check, just about everything else on that check would be pretty much the same as far as guidelines go as the first check, which means Social Security recipients and other beneficiaries of government programs would be included in the payment, especially when we saw that one senator who said that those people shouldn't receive a stimulus check, and there was such an uproar. I think they were kind of like, okay, hey, we're not going to say that again. It seems like no one else was really siding with him on that after he said it. All right, moving on. This question has to do with the EIDL grant. The question is, if I'm an independent contractor, what should I enter for gross revenue and for costs of goods sold? So on this topic, for gross revenue, you will enter in your total earnings as a contractor. And for cost of goods sold, in this case, think of it as your expenses. Expenses might be really low in this case if you're a contractor. They're pretty much guaranteed to be quite low. But it is important to note that expenses are largely used to calculate the potential loan size you can receive. So if you're applying for a grant without the intention to get an EIDL loan, expenses won't make much of a difference on your application. So I wouldn't be too worried about what your expenses are. All right, last question. What do I do if I haven't received the first stimulus check? Okay, to save my listeners who watch every video, I'm not going to go over this again because there's like 10 different scenarios and it takes a long time to go through all of them. So if you haven't received your first stimulus check, Google IRS EIP FAQ, IRS EIP FAQ, and then click the top result. That page will direct you on exactly what to do based on your individual situation. You'll be able to navigate what to do if you haven't received your check. That's the best answer I have for it without making an entire video on it. So that's all I have for today. Check out the link in my description for Webull. If you make an account and deposit $100, you'll receive 2 completely free stocks valued between $12 and $1,400. When I did it, I got 2 free Levi Strauss stocks, and I'm happy to say there was a nice little bump in their stock price the other day, so I'm pretty happy. You could do the same. Also, if you like this shirt, check out the link in my description. It comes in a ton of colors and sizes. Fits great. I actually love this shirt. Anyways, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a profitable day.